morning. Here on a rainy Tuesday morning, here in our beautiful sanctuary. The question on everybody's mind right now is, when are we going to be able to worship in the sanctuary again? It's a perplexing question from the time of the tabernacle as the people were in the wilderness, before they even entered the promised land, when God commissioned the priests and the Levites to build the tabernacle. God's people have had a central place to worship. When the Temple of Solomon was built, a generation after David's reign, it became even more important for the Jews around Jerusalem to be able to worship at the temple, to bring their sacrifices to the temple, and to have that place to worship and to pray and to do the things that God was calling them to do to live out their faith. Things have changed a little bit in New Testament days. We have some different ideas and some different beliefs about how and where we should worship. But for many of us, the thought or the prospect of being able to worship in a location that is sanctified, a sanctuary that is set apart for the worship of God, is an exciting prospect. And it's very meaningful and it's important to us, and to not be able to do that creates some issues for many of us. So I want to share a story with you from Scripture this morning. And it's a long story if I were to read the whole thing, but the short version is that Jesus is in a town called Sychar, and he goes, in the middle of the day, he goes to a well to draw water. And there's a woman there who is a Samaritan woman. This is in John chapter 4, if you would like to look it up for yourself. And Jesus approaches her and asks her for a drink. Now, you have to understand a little bit about the culture. Jews and Samaritans did not associate with one another in public, and certainly Jewish men did not associate with Samaritan women. And so she asks him, "Why would you, a Jewish man, approach me, a Samaritan woman, for water?" And the nutshell version of their conversation is that Jesus offers her a living water, a water that would never make her thirsty. He says, "Whoever drinks this water will thirst again, but whoever drinks of the water that I give him will never thirst." And she says, "Well, let me go tell my husband about this living water so that he may drink of it too." And this is where Jesus gets a little bit personal. Now, I'll remind you that Jesus initiated the conversation. In our Wesleyan theology, we say that's prevenient grace. God's grace is always reaching out to us, no matter where we are or what circumstance we're in. But when she says, "Let me go home and get my husband," Jesus says, if we're honest, you've had 5 husbands, and the man you're with now is not your husband. And she is just blown away that Jesus knows more about her than she realizes. There is an interesting phenomenon when people get personal. I know as a pastor, when I've had conversations with people before, when they begin to get uncomfortable about certain things, they will immediately change the subject. And they may change the subject to predestination versus free will theology. They may change the subject to traditional worship versus contemporary worship. They will ask me my thoughts on different things, and it's always interesting to see how people respond to that. But here, Jesus says this. She says, "You are right in saying, 'I have no husband,' for you have had 5 husbands, and the one you have now is not your husband." That's what Jesus says. "What you have said is true." The woman said to him, "Sir, I see you are a prophet. Our ancestors worshipped on this mountain, but you say that the place where people must worship is in Jerusalem." You being Jesus, who was a Jew. Jesus said to her, "Woman, believe me, the hour is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. We worship what we know, for salvation is from the Jews. But the hour is coming and is now here when true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. For the Father seeks such as these to worship him. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth." The woman said to him, "I know that the Messiah is coming, who is called the Christ. When he comes, he will proclaim all things to us." Jesus said to her, "I am he, the one who is speaking to you." See, Jesus got personal with her, and she changed the subject. "Jesus, what do you think about where we should worship? The Jews say we should worship in the temple, but we Samaritans, we have our high places. We have our other places of worship. Who's right? Are the Jews right, or are the Samaritans right?" And Jesus says, "I tell you that a time is coming when true believers will worship God, worship the Father in spirit and in truth. Because the Father is spirit. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth." What Jesus is saying here, folks, it's not where we worship, but it's how we worship. Even now, as you may not even be a member of our church, but you may have not been able to worship in your church sanctuary. And that's important. There's a wonderful feeling that comes with being in a place that is special to you, a place that is sacred, a place that is sanctified, set apart for the worship of God. But when that, I don't want to say has been taken away from us, but when that is not available to us, what's more important than where we worship is how we worship. And so I'm going to ask you this morning, today, how are you worshiping? Are you worshiping in spirit? Is your spirit in tune with God? Are you worshiping in truth? Are you being honest with God about how you feel and how you think and where you are? Folks, this is a wonderful time for us to reconnect with God in new and exciting ways and to develop those parts of our faith that are not centered around worshiping on Sunday morning. How is our daily Bible study? How is our prayer time? And I'll be honest with you, I'm struggling in some of those ways as well. But how are we worshiping? When we can't worship in Jerusalem, and we can't even worship on the high places, are we worshiping in spirit and in truth? I hope this finds you well. Please be patient until we are able to meet in this beautiful sanctuary again. God bless you.